James 4:6. God opposes the haughty ones, but he gives undeserved kindness to the humble ones. Well, haughtiness is really disdainful pride, superciliousness, arrogance. One who is haughty is in his own estimation superior to his fellow man. On the other hand, humility is freedom from pride or arrogance. It's the state of lowliness of mind. Humility and haughtiness are the exact opposites of each other. Humility is here. Haughtiness is at the other end of the spectrum. Which one are you? Likely neither, but somewhere in between. Now, if Jehovah had a humble, haughty meter, where would the needle be if he was monitoring you? Would it be in the middle? Well, hopefully not. Hopefully be closer to humility. We're imperfect, but we want to be as far away from haughtiness as possible. The verse said, Jehovah opposes the haughty, but he favors those who are humble. Haughtiness is not totally a mental condition per se. Please find Mark chapter 7 with me. Mark 7, verse 21 and 22. Jesus put haughtiness in a lineup with many unsavory qualities and actions. Well, if it's not totally a mental condition, what is haughtiness? Notice how Jesus describes where it comes from. In Mark chapter 7, 21 and 22. It says, for from inside, out of the heart of men, so it's a heart condition, come injurious reasonings, sexual immorality, thefts, murders, acts of adultery, greed, acts of wickedness, deceit, brazen conduct, an envious eye, blasphemy, haughtiness, and unreasonableness. All these things come from within and defile a man. So haughtiness is really a condition of the heart, the inner person. And it says it's a wicked thing. Well, what about humility? In some ancient cultures, a humble person was always thought to be a slave, miserable, a pitiful person. But humility is not the same as humiliation. Instead, in the Bible, it stresses that humility, this lowliness of mind, can actually lead to honor, to status with God. And so does Proverbs 22:4 says, the result of humility is riches and glory and life. Not miserable, not pitiful by any means. Well, we said earlier, if Jehovah had a humble, haughty meter, that the needle likely would not be pegged out on humility in our case, nor on haughtiness. Well, why is that? Well, because as dedicated Christians, none of us are absolutely haughty at heart. But as imperfect, dedicated Christians, none of us have the market on true humility. Only Jehovah and Jesus were absolutely humble. Well, can we be basically a humble person and yet act haughtily or arrogant at times? Well, let's consider Moses. Jehovah gave him tremendous authority, and it's known that power, authority, responsible position can erode humility. But Moses proved his humility time after time. For example, in Numbers chapter 11, he gathered together 70 elders, and verse 25 says that Jehovah took some of the spirit of Moses away and put it on the 70 elders, and they began to behave as prophets. Well, there's nothing that indicates Moses jealously tried to guard his authority and privileges. He was humble. And we all remember the account where Moses' father-in-law suggested that he delegate some of his workload to others. Moses did not arrogantly resist that. He humbly accepted the suggestion. And then later, at the end of his life, when Jehovah chose his replacement, Joshua, Moses humbly accepted that decision. He urged the people to follow Joshua's lead. Well, we could say nothing else than Moses was an excellent example of humility, but he was not perfect. Please find with me Numbers chapter 20. Numbers 20. Humble Moses allowed himself to be provoked and perform an act of haughtiness or arrogance. The situation was that there was no water for the assembly of Israel, and the people began to show arrogant, rebellious spirit. Please pick up the dialogue with me in verse 4 of Numbers chapter 20. They said, "Why have you brought Jehovah's congregation into this wilderness for us and our livestock to die here? And why have you led us up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It's no place for seed and figs and vines and pomegranates, and there's no water to drink." Well, they got under Moses' skin. They caused him to lose his humility momentarily. Look at verse 9. So Moses took the rod from before Jehovah just as he had commanded him. Then Moses and Aaron called the congregation together before the crag, and he said to them, "Hear now, you rebels, must we," meaning Aaron and I, "bring out water for you from this crag?" Well, that was a haughty, arrogant act. Admittedly, the people were out of line with their speech and attitude, but Jehovah took note of the spike in the needle of the haughty meter. Look at verse 12. Jehovah later said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not show faith in me and sanctify me before the eyes of the people of Israel, you will not bring this congregation into the land that I will give them." So though generally Moses' needle was always very close to humility, Jehovah was displeased with this spike on the needle toward haughtiness, even though momentary. Well, it's good for us to consider this because it's easy for us to lose our humility, particularly if we are invested with some authority. Maybe we have a new responsibility in the congregation, on the circuit, at the branch. Or maybe we have a skill and talent that we excel in and we get compliments galore, or we're at odds with a fellow believer. Will we maintain our humility? There was a great line in the February 2013 Watchtower. It said, "Remember, in order to be useful to Jehovah, our humility should always exceed our ability." Well, King Saul, he allowed his ability to exceed his humility. And in 1 Samuel 15:17, he was to not take any spoils from the land, but he allowed that to happen. And in that verse 17, Samuel confronted him and he said, "Were you not insignificant or humble in your own eyes?" And then he says, "Why did you disobey Jehovah?" Well, Saul stammered and stuttered, but bottom line, Jehovah was not pleased because in verse 23, Jehovah said through Samuel, "Rebelliousness is the same as the sin of divination. Pushing ahead presumptuously, the same as magical power and idolatry. You rejected the word of God, I reject you as king." Well, it's just as our text said, Jehovah opposes the haughty ones. May we all strive to keep our needle close to humility.